Okay, we're going to give it a minute before we begin, making sure we are live on all of our platforms. Okay, looks like we're live on LinkedIn, YouTube, and Facebook. Here we go. And welcome, good evening. I'm Rabbi Chernitsky. I'm the director of Chabad of Newfoundland, based in St. John's. And it would be lovely to meet you one day in a safe way. We are continuing with the Jewish history crash course that we started over a month ago. Last week we spoke about Isaac, Yitzchak, very, very briefly. And today we're going to speak about his younger son, Jacob, a bit more at length, so it might take a few classes until we cover Jacob. Jacob is quite significant. We know, of course, he had a big family, have the 12 tribes, 12 boys, and according to Jewish sources, each one was born with a twin sister. So it's 12 boys, 12 girls. And of course, many things happen in his lifestyle that are significant to what happened later on. Of course, he ends up going down into Egypt, and that's why the Jewish nation was there and ended up being enslaved and then redeemed. But let's not get ahead of ourselves, and we'll go in order as we usually do. So, Jacob, or Yaakov in Hebrew, he was, of course, the third of the Jewish patriarchs. Abraham the first, then Isaac, and then Jacob. We know Abraham had Ishmael with Hagar, and Isaac, Yitzchak with Sarah. Hashem told him explicitly that Isaac will carry on the tradition, and Yitzchak had two children, twin boys, Esau and Jacob. Esau was born first, and Jacob was born holding onto his heel. And we're going to be speaking a little bit about that today. And Jacob always stands out because not just he had the 12 sons we mentioned, and they became 12 tribes, but Mitase Shlema, his bed is complete. He didn't have the challenge that his father or grandfather had, that they had a child that wasn't a good person, wasn't going in the right path. To the contrary, he had 12 boys that all went to the path of the Torah and were God-fearing Jews. Jacob is called the favorite of the patriarchs, Bocher Shebe'avos in the original Hebrew. He fought with Esau's angel, and the angel and God gives him another name, Israel, or Yisro, which is the name that the Jewish people is known by. The Bnei Israel is in the Torah. The Jewish people are called the children of Israel, the nation of Israel. But also at times the name Jacob appears again. We won't go into why that is. There are commentators that speak about that. But what's noteworthy is that when he fights with this angel, God says your name will be Israel, won't be Jacob anymore, because Yaakov implies deceit. Akev, which is the source of the name Yaakov, means a heel. He was holding onto Esau's heel when he was born, but also is the same root as the word ikvani, which means to cheat, to deceive somebody. So he said, your name, you won't be called by the name of deceit, but you'll be called by the name Israel. Why Israel? Ki sarita im Elokim anashim betucha, because you struggled with the angel and you were successful and you won the wrestling match. So you see that the name Israel is not because of the victory, because of the sarito or sariso, which means to wrestle. That the virtue of this name is the struggle, not the success. There was a study that done by psychologists. They took school children that were top students, always got A plus, and then they had a group of students that didn't have an A plus. They were B or C, but were hard workers. And after rigorous testing, they saw that the A plus students would give up earlier when presented with a problem that was beyond their capacity, whereas the B and C students, though they may not have gotten the answer right, they persevered more and they tried to answer the problem. There's a beautiful virtue in the struggle, in the challenge, that's not appreciated enough nowadays. Nowadays we focus on results, very much result driven. Did you get an A? Did you get an A plus? And we forget about the effort. Let's not forget that the effort is very special. We know not everybody's mental capacity is the same, and just praising the result might have detrimental effect on those who can't. Anyway, that was just a side note. Going back to the birth of Jacob, his mother, Rebecca, Rivka, she finally conceived after 40 years of being married to Isaac. And she had a very, very difficult pregnancy. And she felt a lot of pain, so she turned to Shem, the son of Noah, for guidance. Shem was a prophet. And Shem says, the pain you're experiencing is because you have twin boys in the womb. Both are destined for greatness. And however, when one becomes strong, the other one will be weak, the other one will fall. And as we know that Esau went to become the father of what became Rome, the Roman Empire, and that's what happened when Rome rose to its greatness. The Jewish people were crushed by the Romans. His name Esau, it's like Asui, means already made, already finished, because when he was born, he was very hairy, like a fully grown person. And then, as we said before, his twin brother Jacob was born right after him, holding onto his heel, and heel in Hebrew is Akev, so they named him Yaakov, Jacob. The Torah tells us that already when they were young children, they were very, very different. That Esau, as he was growing up, he was a hunter. He would lie, he would cheat. Yaakov, on the other hand, he would spend time with the tents of Torah. It says actually that while Rebecca was pregnant with the twins, she would pass by a house of Torah study. Jacob would kick in the womb, trying to come out. He wanted to study Torah. On the other hand, if she went by houses of ill repute, then Esau would kick in the womb, trying to come out and go there. And so already from when they were young, one could tell that they were very, very different. One was the bookworm, a good boy, while Esau wasn't so studious, not studious at all, but he pretended to be very religious. He would come up to his father Isaac, asking all sorts of questions to give the impression that he was a moral person and he was following the Torah path he was educated in. Rebecca, however, their mother saw through it, and she loved Jacob more. When both Jacob and Esau were 15 years old, Abraham passed away, and Jacob was making a lentil soup to comfort his father Isaac, as it's brought down Jewish tradition that mourners eat lentils because the lentils don't have a mouth, so to speak, don't have any opening, representing the mourner who's unable to speak. He's in so much sorrow. We shouldn't know of such things. And also because the oval shape represents a cycle of life. At any rate, Jacob was making this red lentil soup for his father. Esau comes in and he's very, very hungry. And the mother says he had committed his first murder that day. And Esau demanded Jacob to give him some soup. Jacob says, okay, I'll give you soup, but if you sell me in exchange your firstborn rights. And he agreed. He didn't appreciate being a firstborn. He understood that being a firstborn might get him into trouble. And he sold to Jacob the firstborn rights. Then this is something that we mentioned in last class. When Isaac was getting old, he had turned 123. His eyesight was already suffering, and he knew his end was near. And he calls his firstborn, Esau, telling him to go and catch wild animals, prepare for him a good meal. And then he would bless him. But Rebecca, Isaac's wife, hears what's going on, and she quickly sends in Jacob disguised as Esau so that he could get the blessings. Esau comes back and he realizes what happened, that Jacob stole the blessings. And Isaac says, I'm so sorry, there's nothing I could do for you. Esau gets very, very upset, and he decides to kill Jacob. So Rebecca and Isaac tell Jacob to leave, and he should go to Rebecca's brother Laban, his uncle, who lived in the city of Haran, which is modern-day Syria. So over there, he should get married, find a wife, and he could hide out until Esau calms down. One of the famous aspects of his life, Jacob's life, is at this point when he leaves his home and is on the way to Haran. He falls asleep for the night, and in a dream he sees a ladder stretching from the ground to the heavens with angels going up and down. And as he's watching this, God promises him three things. Number one, that the land of Canaan, the land of Israel, will be given to Jacob's descendants. Number two, that his descendants will be widespread, numerous, and the source of blessing for the whole world. And number three, that God would be with him wherever he went, and God would protect him. And that God's promise to Abraham that his children will become the chosen nation will be fulfilled through Jacob. That's what God told him as well. And he wakes up and he says, oh, I didn't realize there was such a special place. And he names the place Bethel, the house of God. And that became later on the eventual location of the temple in the Temple Mount in Jerusalem. So just briefly to speak more about the ladder, again, we try to keep it brief and focus on the history. The rabbis explained that Jacob saw in the dream 4 angels going up the ladder, and in turn falling after a certain number of rungs, and that each angel represents one of the 4 nations that exiled the Jewish people. And God's promise to Jacob to always protect him means that even when the Jews are in those terrible exiles, they'll be okay in the end. Hasidic thought explains that the ladder represents prayer, which is our effort to connect ourselves while we're below with God above. And just like the ladder has different rungs, so the prayer has 4 primary stages, each one higher than the other. And the lesson from the ladder is that we could connect the most physical planes of existence with God himself. Jacob finally makes it to the Haran, and he meets his cousin Rachel and falls in love with her. Rachel, or Rachel in English, has a sister Leah who's older. And his uncle Laban agrees to shelter Jacob for a month in exchange of Jacob working for him as a shepherd. And after the month is over, Jacob asks Laban for Rachel's hand. Laban says, okay, but you have to work for 7 more years. 7 more years, 7 years is a long time. But the Torah tells us Jacob loved Rachel so much that it seemed to him like just a few days. But the story doesn't end so well here. Laban is the master crook and switches Rachel for Leah. So instead of Jacob marrying Rachel, ends up marrying Leah. It was dark, he didn't see. Only the next morning he realized who this was. So Jacob says, why did you deceive me to Laban? Laban says, well, here the custom is that you always marry off the older daughter first. And he says, if you want to marry Rachel, that's another 7 years. Meaning you could marry her in a week later from the day after the marriage to Leah, in exchange for 7 more years of work. And that's what happens. Okay, so we have 7 years, 14 years. And then after those 14 years, Jacob agrees to stay for another 6 years with Laban to take care of the sheep, making a deal that very specific ones would belong to Jacob. Without going to the details, Laban would constantly switch the agreement, which already was very lopsided against Jacob, and would try to get as many sheep as he could, always changing the deal. But with God's help, Jacob actually became very, very, very wealthy with a lot of sheep of different colors. I see it's 8:16. So we are going to stop here. There's a lot more to say. If you have any questions, comments, concerns, you could post it here, or you could send me an email, rabbi.newfoundland@gmail.com. You could also check out our website, rabbi.newfoundland.com. Easy to remember. Have a good evening. I'm Rabbi Chernitsky, Director of Chabad of Newfoundland.